Hello again everybody and welcome back to the LVFR A340-300 for Microsoft Flight Simulator, Episode 2, Takeoff, Climb to Cruise in this new quadjet for MSFS. Hope you're enjoying the series so far. Hit like, hit subscribe. If you're just tuning in, it's me, Luke, also known as British AvGeek. Go check out my YouTube channel and we're going to cover initially now Takeoff here from Madrid for our flight to Tenerife North. As a reminder, we're using the official LVFR A340 tutorial handbook, the PDF included in the product, and we're following it precisely step by step for this routing. We're all ready to go, and we're at threshold 4, runway 36 left, departing onto the Cáceres for November departure. So, our steps for takeoff. We want to make sure we've turned the parking brake off, and at that point now we can select auto brake max, strobe lights go on, runway turn off lights on, landing lights on, nose lights takeoff. We want to make sure the flight directors are on as well, they are, and we'll just double check our FCU to make sure we are happy with the setup there. And we want to have a look at the memos here. Takeoff memos, no blue. So we know that's all set and checked. Much like the other Airbus aeroplanes, we're going to line up nice and gradually along the centre line. And we are then going to increase thrust to 50% N1 for the A340. When stable, we will then push the throttles to flex. If I was to tap the brakes now, it will reset the auto brake and turn it back off again, so that's something worth bearing in mind there in the state that it's currently in. And I'll just demonstrate that momentarily. In fact, it's remained on, even better. So just gradually holding it on the brakes. We're satisfied now that we are all ready to go. Transponders on auto, TARA, everything else is done. And now we can just think about takeoff. So as before, we'll just gently increase the throttles to 50% N1, which is about there. Engines are all spooled up, ready to go. And then we'll set the throttles to flex. Brakes are off, power's set, speed's alive, accelerating now through 80 knots, using rudder to maintain the centre line. V1, rotate. V2, gently back on the stick as we rotate back. Into a climb. Positive rate, gear up. And then we'll follow the flight directors initially. Providing that's in line now, which it is, we can select autopilot 1 on. And then we're waiting for lever climb. So initially targeting V2 plus 10. There it is. So we drop the throttles back to the climb gate, depending on how you set your throttles. Should sit in the gate nicely. And as we go through F, we'll bring the flaps to 1. And then again, flaps to 0. We're no longer in SRS mode. and we are accelerating nicely. Depending on what the situation is, you could leave the aircraft to automatically retract the flaps for you, but that's entirely up to yourselves. But it would be good to make sure you're kind of doing it yourself. Now the flaps have gone to 0 and the aeroplane is clean. We want to disarm the ground spoilers, and then we'll continue to climb through the standard instrument departure with the autopilot engaged. Through 10,000 feet. We will look to turn the landing lights off, and we can do the seatbelt signs as well, providing that we're flying fairly straight and smooth. And then we're going to work through to cruise. Climbing out of Madrid. Now when we get further into the climb, we're actually looking at levelling off for our cruising altitude. Our cost index of 15 that we put in earlier will help influence our optimum cruise Mach number, which the aircraft will automatically target with its auto throttle system. So depending on the cost index, the cruise level, the temperature, the weight, the headwind component, the optimum might actually be slightly different each day you fly. As we pass 10,000 feet, you should see the aeroplane pitch down slightly and begin to accelerate to its full climb speed. There we go, targeting 320 knots on the left there. As the aeroplane pitches down to reduce the rate of climb, that will allow it to accelerate quicker up to its target speed, and around 10,000 feet above ground level we can turn runway turn-off lights, nose lights off, and the landing lights off as well. We can turn the seatbelt sign off when you feel ready, and we want to continue the climb up now to our cruise of flight level 350. If you want to go into open climb for any reason, you can pull the knob and you'll see there it says open climb instead. If you want to remain in managed climb, you can just push it in and you get the little yellow dot to tell you that you're in managed mode. As we climb through 13,000 feet here, that's the departure transition altitude. We want to make sure we go to standard pressure, and that will ensure that as we fly around above transition altitudes, all of the aeroplanes around us will be flying to the same altitude altimeter setting. Throughout the journey, monitor your fuel. Check it against the waypoints and the data in your SimBrief flight plan, just to make sure that your fuel burn is what you kind of expect it to be. So the estimated fuel on board at each waypoint in your OFP on SimBrief, you want it to be around there. Try and identify if it's above that or below that, and work out then how much to decide on your fuel burn and your flight progress. Going through 13,000, so we can go to standard pressure, and that will then turn all of our altitudes into flight levels, and we want to make sure that the standby instrument there matches as well. And because it's Airbus, the throttles can remain in the climb gate for the duration of the flight. When we get to flight level 350, the aeroplane will level off, settle into its cruising speeds, which will be in the perf page That's our climb speed of 320. Press next, it will show you the cruise. An estimated managed speed of 285. Now as we go over flight level 280, we will focus more on the Mach number at the bottom of the speed tape there to try and help work out our cruising speeds. It's also worth pointing out that you will find in the climb the A340-300 is a slow climber, so don't expect A320neo type performance where you'll be looking at climbing at 2,000-3,000 foot per minute. Actually, if you look at your rate of climb, you're going to see it sit around 1,500 foot per minute, and as we get higher that will actually tail off to near 1,000 to 800 foot per minute roughly, or 800 to 1,000 foot per minute roughly. Quite a shallow climb. You can see there the nose is only about 2 degrees nose up. If you're flying a long haul flight, for example, as it mentions in the tutorial PDF, a flight from Los Angeles to Paris Charles de Gaulle, then your Simbrief flight plan might generate step climbs, initially showing, for example, flight level 330, and then stepping up to flight level 350 and 370. If you do want to initiate step climbs, you need to identify the waypoints in your flight plan route where the step climbs are suggested, and then you'll need to go to the init page and change the cruise flight level to the relevant value. To initiate your step climb. You'll then also need to make sure that you change the target altitude on the FCU. The final part of this episode, the descent and descent planning, will be covered later on in the flight. So enjoy the next hour or so whilst you're flying around in the cruise, and we will touch base momentarily as we consider descent. So a little while later then, we've made some really good progress towards Tenerife North, well into cruise, approaching top of descent. So far in episode 2 we've done takeoff, climb, spoke about cruise, spoke about some step climb potential as well for those of you wanting to do some longer haul flights, and now we're going to brief for the descent at the tail end of this episode. With that in mind, we'll turn our attention to the flight deck. We can see it in about 200 nautical miles now we've had that top of descent marker, and we want to make sure that data looks correct, and I'm going to use the Navigraph overlay to speak about the charts and the procedures a little bit more. If you have the charts functionality, you can of course use it within the EFB. But this is just a little bit easier for me to actually physically show you on the screen. So we're going to be approaching via Samar, which is this waypoint here. In fact, we can actually see that in our nav display in around about 110 nautical miles from now. From there we have 113.5 nautical miles to get down to 6,000 feet by Tenerife North. From there we have 113.5 nautical miles to waypoint Nervo, and then 58 nautical miles rounded up to get to Tenerife North, which is that VOR there, with a frequency of 117.7, and the IAF means that's the initial approach fix. We can see waypoint Basux, and we've got another VOR at the airport itself, Tenerife Los Arroyos, 116.2, with the 3-letter identifier there of LRO. The weather displays on the left hand side on the Navigraph screen is representative of live weather. Now, because of these conditions and the desire to follow the tutorial PDF precisely, we're going to revert back to, we're actually going to be flying into Tenerife using calm weather conditions. We're not going to be using live weather, and that is going to trigger a QNH of 1013 and calm winds. We've also tuned the ILS Zulu for runway 12, which, as you can see, looks like this. So entering via Tenerife North, we'll then begin a downwind leg to 16 DME, but instead of turning inbound onto a final approach from 11 miles, we're going to follow the tutorial series PDF, which will have us turn in towards Basux for 6,000 feet. From there we're going to step down to 4,000 feet before intercepting the ILS at around about 11 miles, and then we'll fly the ILS to touchdown. We're now going to put in all of that data into the MCDU. So press perf, next phase, and if you're flying on live weather, you want to use the METAR information for GCXO like so in the home page. Get METAR, there it is. So if you're using live weather, that's the data you want to use. Now this aircraft, the A340-300, because of its approach speeds, is a category C aircraft just about. So we can use the data from the charts where it says C to input our MDA or DH. We're doing an ILS Zulu runway 12. We're not doing a Cat 2, Cat 3 ILS or anything like that, just a very simple basic ILS. So we're going to input 2378 feet into the MDA, which is the decision altitude, and that is linked to our pressure altitude here, not our radio altimeter, which is DH. That's linked to the rad alt. Something slightly different there. We're doing a Cat 2 ILS, and we had, for example, where it shows on the charts 316, we would put 316 into DH. And then the transition level is going to be 7,000 feet into Tenerife North today, so we're going to amend that transition altitude figure there to 7,000. And that is it, we are done. As we burn a little bit more fuel through the final section of today's flight, that approach speed might drop down slightly for us, but we're not expecting it to. That will be the figure that the aeroplane will want to try and achieve when we get a bit closer to our final approach. Check your RadNav page and cross-check that against the charts. So you can see here, for VOR 1, I've input 116.2 manually. That is the Los Rodeos VOR 116.2. I just circled that on the charts there. And on VOR 2, Tenerife North, I've circled that as well, 117.7. The ILS shows ILS 12, 108.7 for the frequency, and that matches that of the charts. That's correct. But you'll notice the discrepancy with the course. The charts says 115. The aircraft says 114. We're going to leave that as it is because it might be a scenery discrepancy. So we're not going to touch that. The final bit of our descent planning is going to be consideration for auto brake. Now, most real-life Airbus pilots that I've spoken to, in the States at least, will predominantly use auto brake low, followed by manual brakes when decelerating on the runway. In Europe, however, some operators would require some airports be flown in with a medium auto brake selected below a certain length. The runway length at Tenerife North is 3,171 meters, so we're going to use auto brake low today. When we get closer to top of descent, we're going to want to change the altitude figure in the FCU to 6,000, and then we can either select managed descent or selected descent. The latter will trigger the open descent on the FMA. We can also use vertical speed mode to descend if we want to in the open descent, and that will allow us to control our vertical speed precisely based on what we want rather than what the aeroplane wants. So all we have left to do is pop the VOR modes on so it begins to track and wait for top of descent. Hope you've enjoyed episode 2 of the LVFR A340-300 tutorials for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Hit like, hit subscribe, share your thoughts down in the comments below, and I'll see you at top of descent. Thanks for watching.